my question to you is about that. Can you brief us on the situation with land? And what is that situation? As far as I understand, the victims of liquidation and the widows can get their land plots since 1986 or maybe 1991, when the law on Chernobyl was signed over. The situation is like this. With the Chernobyl law, we have the mandatory payments after approaches from the Chernobyl liquidators. You can have two purposes. First, for individual construction. If you have no flats provided, in that case, you can get this plot of land parcel for construction of individual housing, or the other option, it can be for gardening, for an orchard, or for a garage or a second home. Well, a cottage. And according to the statistics that we keep, some of our applicants would get flats, a big share. The majority are still waiting for 20 or 30 years they are, and they have no flats provided. So we suggested as an option. We developed the algorithm for with all the annexes and appendices. We consulted people how to fill in the forms, how to approach local governments with that issue. So this is supposed to be one size of plot. In the urban areas, in the rural areas, it's a different size. Bigger one, of course. There are many liquidators, and all the victims actually, they are telling us that they realize that they have very slim chances of getting any kind of residential housing provided during their lives, because the queues don't seem to move at all. So they decided to try at least to get themselves some kind of a land plot. First of all, this will depend on the local authorities in the field that is, how they will respond to that, the local authorities, because nobody would come to them, and never they are surprised even to discover, sometimes astonished, that they have this right, that they're entitled. How that will work in practice, we'll see, and we'll monitor the process, of course, and accordingly we will discuss it publicly. If we have any kind of incompliance or delays. Do I get it right that to get a land plot we need to pick up the place and then apply formally with the package of documents to a municipal council, to the municipality, and takes 6 months, the minimum, the maximum, then you can do something. Well, the procedure is not that cumbersome, it's general. You write an application, there is a form for that, and it should be your community. The purpose of use should be indicated. If they want a land plot, the size roughly, because there are some grades according to the purpose. For gardening, not more than 0.12 hectare. For construction in the rural areas, not more than 0.25. For the urban areas, not more than 0.15. And to this, we should attach some sketches. The sketches where you point to the place where the actual locality of that land plot. The cadastre file, and you can see all the available plots. You can pick up the one you prefer and put all the documents together. indicate the actual plot, and you can apply it to the local authorities. According to the law, from the point of filing, it should take not more than a year. It's not like should be, it shall be. That's what the law says. Within 12 months. How this is reviewed at the sessions of the councils, whether they will satisfy or won't satisfy such request, we just speculate. I wouldn't like to. So if they fail to do it within a year, what will happen? Well, again, the only way is to go to court with this. There's no other way, I'm afraid. All right, so I would like to ask you, gentlemen, whether you have any land plot. The Union Chernobyl of Ukraine once had that action for all the regions of Ukraine. Every community would apply to the local authorities, and the majority of them received such plots in Kiev region because it's closer to Chernobyl. That's the irony of it. You understand? So that's where you belong, right? And here, if you say that you can get a pick, take a pick, the cadastre have to find a plot. This is nonsense. You can find a plot, but they would say we have a different design for this one, a different idea as to how we should use it. But and then what the sketch? To create the sketch, you have to apply to some private business, and that they can get this sketch. And the cadastre of the occupied and not occupied ones.
There are no maps like this because regional authorities have their own maps, and when you come, you find that the plot that you wanted is already gone, is no longer available. And there are so many steps you have to go through, and at every step you have to pay and get this paper and that paper and one document and the second document. But eventually, when you get to the final stage, that plot becomes so expensive you can't afford it. Oksana, could you tell us about the status of cleanup workers' widows? Because if I understand correctly, widows could also get some subsidies and some benefits. Widows of cleanup workers, in fact, enjoy the same rights and compensations. So, in my opinion, it's all clear. But I never heard of this. I had no idea that they can inherit these rights. Yes, a wife and children of the cleanup worker after his death can enjoy the same privileges. We must have spent up to 10 years to amend Chernobyl legislation, and we indeed amended it finally. But in addition to the law, there is enabling legislation, and if within 10 days of the death of the cleanup worker, If she doesn't process all the documents, she loses all the privileges. And then through court, it's very hard to do it because the law doesn't provide for the opportunity to renew your rights through court. So this is a considerable problem, and we've been trying hard to solve this problem. Recently, they extended 10 days to 30 months to 30 days. But if someone lives in the village, traveling to regional district center or county office, it takes a long time, and these days it's so hard. And so there are loopholes, and the government is doing all it can to avoid paying these privileges to widows. So there is red tape that you have to go through on all this rigmarole. For instance, organs of government had to respond only within 10 days, now within 1 month. So we never get responses. Yes, when I phone them, they also respond forever. I can't even get a reference number from them. Oksana, could you tell us something about the status of children of Chernobyl? Children of Chernobyl, it means children under 18. So nowadays, they are all adults. So I never came across a child of Chernobyl who is still 17 years old, for instance, or underaged. But now, in other words, they used to enjoy this, right? So when they were underage, but not anymore. Valery, what could you add? See, children and children, the disabled, or children with disabilities, this category under current legislation is only covered until the age of 18. In Japan, hypocrisy, those who still suffered, there's still hypocrisy, the state supports them, and doctors watch them, and so on. And here, children of Chernobyl is just, they're like, they have no rights. The moment you turn 18, you lose your rights. Is it true that some illnesses can be inherited? And if someone got this illness, it will be hereditary? Yes, because it's part of the genome. So it would make sense to follow up all these people and give them privileges and have doctors keep an eye on them and support these individuals and their offspring because of the genome that's being, which is because it's hereditary. Well, if children got disability because of Chernobyl, it happened during the accident on the territory of the state, so the state should take responsibility for this. Perhaps the state could take that, but unfortunately the way this country is run, it's not the case. We asked for help on numerous occasions, and our NGO and individually. Unfortunately, nothing has changed. And my impression is that these people just, they don't care. Oksana, could you tell us about the criminal case, about this person from Lubny? If you could tell us, well, let me explain to you in layman terms. Just a second. Within Chernobyl project, we're trying to understand the situation with privileges and what works and what doesn't, because it's clear that land is no longer issued to Chernobyl cleanup workers. There is access to online map where you can see all the available land. So now we'd like to follow some problems and some high-profile cases. And in the town of Lubme, there is one story. What happened in Kharkiv? It dates back to the fact that Chernobyl Medical Hospital became a hospital for COVID-19 patients. Chernobyl cleanup workers were against this. So the negotiations dragged on for a long time. Eventually, they failed to understand each other, and they said, okay, we'll look into this. There was a protest against this because they failed to understand each other. And on the territory of the hospital, the cleanup workers who were undergoing treatment there participated in this protest. The police arrived, and they were supposed to maintain public order. So, to long story short, the person who was treated there, a cleanup worker, when the ambulance came, they were bringing another cleanup worker from a different hospital with confirmed COVID-19 diagnosis. But in that hospital, they had no equipment, how to treat this person. And when ambulance was driving through, they opened the gates, the police would shut the gates, and there was a fight. So the policeman fell down, and he felt bad. And it was the way it was presented that one of the cleanup worker knocked him down and hurt him. Now this individual is under investigation. Now this cleanup worker has complications. His state of health is very poor, and all the evidence, including the video evidence and all the witnesses who were interrogated, no one said they saw the cleanup worker beat up the police officer. They said, I couldn't see anything. I only saw that he fell on the ground. Now, based on the opinion of the defense lawyers who deal with this case and who are investigating this case, it looks like it was the whole thing was framed, and apparently it's an attempt to tell the cleanup workers, just sit tight and don't yap too much. Otherwise, we won't help you and we'll put you behind bars. So it's the local cleanup workers believe that this is a basically an intimidation operation conducted by the police, who fall over in a theatrical fashion without no reason, trying to set up cleanup workers, and next week there'll be a court hearing and one has to go through the procedures to the very end. We are watching this and we'll see what this will actually lead to. And why the police officer was beat up, no one knows whether it was actually true or not. Thank you. Valery, could you comment on this, please? Well, the government doesn't like Chernobyl cleanup workers. That's true, because this is the only organized force. And what has been happening in Kharkiv, I think regional Kharkiv, CHRNBL should take this under their control and they should demand all the documents. Now there is the law in force, and the organization that is going to oversee this, they can demand copies of all the documents from court, because there is this tendency that documents after this disappear. That includes the existing video. And as far as clashes with the police, well, it has always been the case. We're always accused of this. For example, we are accused of blocking the road. But if there are 1,500 people, they get together near the cabinet of ministers, of course they block the road, because there isn't enough space for people to hold their rally. The only tool we can use is civil disobedience. And we're fighting for our state. Thank you, Oksana, for your comments. Just to remind you, if you are a cleanup worker, please visit helpchernobyl.com. You can fill out your form and get advice from a lawyer. This project is supported by Eastern Europe Fund, and it is also supported by the European Union. The project has recently been launched, so of course we can't guarantee that we will have quick, positive decisions, but we've been collecting information to improve this methodology. So within the next month, we'll tell you more about this. I think it's quite demonstrative because it shows how Chernobyl cleanup workers are treated these days. And that includes the story of Kharkiv situation. And so people in Kharkiv had their experience. I spoke to Lubmi as far as I know. I wanted to ask you the following question. Are there any examples, similar examples of unfairness?
Що значить на увазі?
Ну так, не все.
Саме ставлення до Чорнобильської теми вже несправедливість.
What do you mean by injustice? The very attitude taken is unjust. I can tell you about one thing that strikes me very much. This is a remedy, court remedy for the pensions and allowances. What is really a shameful thing. Even regardless of the decisions, they are not enforced for years because the pension fund wouldn't disperse any pensions according to the court decision. Well, the Ukrainian courts are one thing, but some of the liquidators go to the European Court of the European courts, but the decisions of such courts are not enforced in Ukraine either. This is the lack of responsibility, irresponsibility as regards your own citizens. And this is a certain category of sufferers, of victims. And the government has some obligations. It's not just doing your own thing, and you have a positive obligation not just to provide for citizens, but also to reinforce the decisions of the European courts and demand an European Court of Human Rights. So it's such a shame. It's such an unpleasant experience, even if you take one case, an individual case. But this is not an individual case. This is a system. This is the attitude as regards victims of Chernobyl. The liquidators know court decisions are enforced, and reinforced. And that is a declaration tool stays on paper, looks beautiful, but in practice, in fact, we have the totally opposite thing happening. Unfortunately, have you anything to add to this? I have already mentioned we have even a decision of the Constitutional Court. Cannot get any higher in the hierarchy of our judicial system. And this is a well-known, for some notorious decision on other sides, that the law on Chernobyl should be constitutionally enforced for the 3 categories of disabled people, 6, 8 to 10 minimal pensions. For the retired people, it is not enforced. They have some resolutions adopted in conflict with the law in order to avoid enforcement of this one. I don't know of any other state. Maybe this is something, the game they are playing for some years now. Chernobyl is actually an epitome of those games. The laws are adopted and you have to reinforce. It's all about money. It's all about funding. And the government have to look for some loopholes. They amend something, they cancel the minimum and disbursements of all sorts, and they use some excuses. So they delegate that to the executive body, and the constitutional court, of course, repeals all the novelties, but it doesn't gain anything, unfortunately. Based on the decision of the Constitutional Court, they are supposed to receive the money. But the decisions, so even of the Constitutional Court, are not enforced. Even if I win in my case, I have no chances to get anything, because he's the neighbor, he's the comrade of mine, he's a colleague of mine, and they get nothing. The pension fund wouldn't just disperse. And so what should we do? We attack the building of the fund by storm. What can we do? How can we advocate? I would like to tell you here that however strange it might sound, but in some parts of Ukraine, this is resolved to some degree. But Kiev, the capital, and the region constitute the biggest problem. It's supposed to be a model municipality, a model region for enforcement, for implementation. We understand that the courts are overloaded, the pandemic effect, and in the field and some other regions, these issues are solved, and the courts are more or less operational. The enforcement is more or less all right, and people get their pensions with the indexation. But in Kiev, it's the biggest problem. For 18 months after the decision, they cannot have this recalculated and disbursed. Most importantly, I do not know what's the way out of the situation, because I myself, for 18 months, have had this case pending. It's a single payment for a disabled person as a liquidator. So it's about your health status. You are recognized as disabled people or have the second category since 2010. Well, we wouldn't think about some allowances, wouldn't think about some obligations of the state and hence of the government. Within 3 years, that was the deadline. But when I discovered that the state was supposed to pay me once, that single payment, I filed an application and received an answer that you had 3 years. Now it's all expired, but it is not. People would get their money back, but applying to courts now, I have done it myself, but it's pending for 18 months, and I'm not supposed to see the claimant, sorry, the defendant in my case. It's a fast-track procedure. I filed that application, came to the administrative court of the city of Kiev. I wanted to use the fast track, procedure, but there was no expediency used in my case. And here you can see the results. That's the system at work, the judicial system, I mean. Thank you. I have a question from the floor for Valery. How the state medical register of victims is doing? Is it there and is it helpful? The register has been assigned to different agencies, the Ministry of Defense, the Center for Radiological Medicine. They all have their own registers. Our principal register is from that of the Center for Radiation Medicine. We are in cooperation with the Medical Academy of Science or Academy of Medical Science. So this is not just helpful, it's our work. It's our duty to do it. We're working on it, and we always approach respective bodies to solve the problems that we have: realistic, chronicle, and chronic diseases, and figuratively speaking. We had the COVID-19 patients, and in the same hospital we have people doing the rehabilitation from our midst. So they are exposed to another danger, as you can understand. But we'll see how it turns out. Our government is sometimes unpredictable.